Hello, and welcome to the Exponential Growth Podcast, powered by Analyst Investors. I'm your host, David Olivencia, co-founder of Analyst Investors, and a passionate advocate for leveraging innovation and technology to drive success. Let's get started. This is Exponential Growth. I also want to give gratitude to Salvi Media. They're the founding sponsor of the podcast. They're a premier executive content agency dedicated to crafting exceptional content and strategies that elevate companies' brands and their executives. They're creators of the Emmy Award-winning CEO series. I think many of you have seen that. We've also featured one of my portfolio companies, Analyst Investors and Hallow, on their CEO series. And they've had in-depth interviews with CEOs talking about their personal journeys and business experience. The CEO series can be found on Cheddar, Entrepreneur Magazine, Reach TV, and really want to thank Salvi Media for their support of the podcast. You can also follow them on social media, as well as they have a podcast studio in Chicago. Join them as well. So again, thank you, Salvi Media, for making this podcast possible. Today with us, we have a very special guest. Somebody I got to know through Analyst Investors, and then also doing some joint investments together as well. A leader, an investor across multiple asset classes, and a patriot, right? A veteran, and was also part of the Student Veterans of America and leading that up. His current role, he's the global CFO and U.S. president of Talapat. He serves on couple different boards. One's UBS funds, trillions of dollars or so under UBS funds. He's on one of the boards there. The board of Canela Media, which is a portfolio company of Analyst Investors, board of Latino Media Network. He's the chair of 1200 VC, a venture capital fund that invests in other funds. He's a co-founder of Analyst Investors, which is how we met. He worked in the Illinois State Treasurer's office as a chief investment officer, had about 52 billion-ish of assets assets under management, and also served in the military as well, and other things as well. So let's welcome to the podcast, Rodrigo Garcia. Welcome.
Thank you, and to everyone tuning in, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you, David. It's always great to work with you on a number of different fronts, and these kinds of conversations are important, not just to be able to learn from each other, but to enlighten and to bring different perspectives, and hopefully we're able to bring some of that here today, given my background, my insights, my perspective, and my experience to date.
Yeah, so we're gonna have some fun. So I always like to start out, I touched on a lot of the things, but I want to start about you. Like, kind of who's Rodrigo Garcia and all the things that have you've learned along the way, and a bit about your journey. So Rodrigo.
Sure. It's I'll cut this in a couple of different ways. So the first piece, I'll give you a bit about who I am today. So as you mentioned, I'm the global chief financial officer and U.S. president at Talapat, which is an investment enterprise and multinational conglomerate. And you're like, well, what exactly does that mean? Well, the most easy way to do this is, on one side of the house, we invest and allocate capital into non-control investments across various sectors and industries. So these are investments of capital into, as of all the things that you can think about: stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities, venture capital, private equity, private credit, venture debt, etc. But then on the other side of the house, we have control holdings. These are companies that we operate under the umbrella of Talapat, and so these are companies that we control, and where we work with our CEOs on the day-to-day and strategy of these organizations across a number of verticals, including media and entertainment, logistics, hospitality, agriculture, cybersecurity, etc. And so it's a very unique role where I'm very much involved in all the investments, all the banking, all the financial activities and operations, including the P&L leadership, corporate strategy, enterprise systems, and so forth. And that gives me a very broad, because it's not just various investments and asset classes, but it's operations in a variety of different industries in multiple countries as well. And
Very diverse, man. Different
yeah,
industries, different assets, different
yeah.
countries.
Exactly. And so then you kind of put that overlay of then some of the work that I continue to do on some of the boards that I sit on independent of Talaba. These are companies that are independent of Talaba, which are all the ones that you've already mentioned, including UBS, Canela, and Latino Media Network. And then you kind of top it with some of my previous experience as deputy state treasurer and chief investment officer at the state of Illinois, or my tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, or some of the entrepreneurship work that I've done in trying to get, worthy investment and or worthy objectives off the ground, including the work that we've done in Angeles Investors, co-founding the organization, or co-founding Student Veterans of America, which is a large, organization that represents more than 1 million military veterans who are on college campuses throughout the U.S. and abroad, the work that we've done at 1200 VC, et cetera. And so all of these experiences and others that I've worked, Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, or as a cabinet member at the state of Illinois, or others, has really broadened my horizon when it comes to how to be able to lead, how to be able to innovate, how to be able to invest, and how to be able to understand the world. And then so that's kind of like what I'll call the professional experience. But then on the personal side, I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. That for those who may not be familiar, it's a very rough and tumble part, but it's a rough and tumble part of Chicago, but it's also a place where it's the basket of the immigrant community, at least on the south side of Chicago, where it's a neighborhoods that are known for their culture, their music, their food, the work ethic, the we'll call it the variety of the immigrant experience, the richness of the immigrant experience. And so when my parents came here to the U.S. in the 1970s and began to, take stock in the city of Chicago, well, I grew up amongst that community, and I saw all the beauty of it in music and food and camaraderie and work ethic. But in very fairness, I also grew up in a neighborhood that with poverty and barriers to opportunity and crime and drugs and all those kinds of things that are present in many communities, but in this one it was just a bit more prevalent. And I early on began to understand the value of an education, the value of hard work, the value of discipline, and the value of being able to see the world in a different perspective. And so when I took that experience and I put it through a leadership incubator, in this case being the United States Marine Corps, where you begin to learn about what moves people, what motivates people, what inspires people, both your own colleagues, as well as when you put together things like crisis communications, or making decisions under fire, in this case literal fire, or being able to make decisions through unforeseen circumstances. So you got your personal experience, and then kind of this leadership incubator of the United States Marine Corps, and then you put this with this professional experience, and it has allowed me to go through some of the most formative experiences, not just growing up, but even in my professional career, and leveraging some of these soft skills and some of these perspectives and comprehension, and with technical ability to create the person who I am today. And I think that's why, to some degree, I've been able to be successful in the various opportunities and roles that I've been presented, not just because of my technical knowledge, but also because of my leadership aptitude, and then my own upbringing, and always trying to keep myself humble, tethered to the ground, understanding that the world is not just about the tangibles, but it's also about the intangibles, including things like work ethic and honesty and understanding people and empathy and so forth. So that's a bit about who I am and how I've come to be today.
No, it's a great story. And I mean, I've always known some of it, and every time I kind of learn a little bit, but a bit more about it. And I think, coming from the South Side of Chicago, and then now kind of having this global role, global industries, all these different asset classes, call it billions, whether it's state trillions, just seeing this, when you're growing up and you can't even imagine all the financial capital in the world that's going around and moving around. And and now you're getting a good view into this, into all the capital and assets and things that are moving the world, coupled with your leadership. And also it's a great
Yeah.
story.
I'll say, I'll give you a little snippet because it should give you an indication of, how I was raised. And so when my father had a workplace injury and he couldn't work because he couldn't lift anything. It was a back injury and he was out for almost a year from his workplace. And the short-term disability covered like 50% of his salary. So we had to figure out a way to bring additional income into the household. And so he put some railings on our 1964 Ford red pickup truck, and we traversed the alleys of the south side of Chicago picking up scrap metal. I was 12 years old. I was in a very one of the most impressionable parts of growing up, and initially, what was something of, I was embarrassed. We're picking up other people's garbage, Dad, but we had to put food on the table and we had to pay the bills, and my dad couldn't lift much, and so this is what we had to do. But it quickly became, it wasn't one about embarrassment. It was one about pride and one about like, this is what we need to do. We have to put ourselves up from the bootstraps. When the circumstances change, you can complain and put your head down, or you'd stand proud and say, all right, what do we got to do to change? And so it taught me early on about, not about entrepreneurship and
Yeah.
make it in a business, like which neighborhoods provide the highest yields of scrap metal, and which
There you go.
how can we actually make more money off of this? Oh, actually, we should maybe take the things that are actual junk to the scrap yard, but the things that have some potential resale value, why don't we clean them up? This is my dad talking to me, and we go to the flea market, and we can actually get an even higher value on the resale rather than just doing everything scrap metal. So, I was 12 years old, so I was learning about pricing objects at the flea market, supply and demand at the macroeconomic level. I began to learn about, work ethic and discipline, which neighborhoods give you the highest yield, which scrap yards pay you more, not pay you more, which ones will, be much more picky about what type of scrap metal you bring. Like, is it a rim with a tire around it? That's scrap metal. And so all these little things, even though they were microcosms of an experience that was by necessity, it began to taught me a lot of important lessons in life about how is it that you're able to run a business that in this case was so rudimentary to say broad, complex companies and multi conglomerates today, but it was one also of necessity, and so that's a little bit about how I approach life, and even in my own present being, but yeah, even business, I was learning it at a very early age.
It's just amazing. And then you can tell it's had a great impact on you as well. So on this exponential growth podcast, we like to talk about trends, right? And you're seeing them, as mentioned, different industries, different geographies, different asset classes and investments. So for our listeners out there, from your viewpoint, what do you see are just the key, call it exponential trends that they should be aware of, and study and get in front of?
Sure.
Sure.
So I'm going to mention probably two or actually three that come to mind, and they're not going to be, anything revolutionary that in terms of like, oh, I've never heard that one before. These are all things that I believe people have heard of before, but I'm going to give you a little bit of color as to why I also think. So the three are obviously, and in no rank or order or preference, but it will be artificial intelligence, it'll be quantum technology, and then the blockchain. Those are the three that come to mind immediately. Now, why artificial intelligence? Well, it's very straightforward. It's eliminating manual and analytical cognitive tasks and processes. And so it's about efficiency. It is about data-driven decisions. It is about an ability to provide continuous learning on as if you think about all the various revolutions from the industrial revolution to the digital revolution and so forth. It is about becoming much more efficient. It is about providing the human or the person with additional tools. So when it comes to artificial intelligence, we're talking about continuous learning of the individual and equipping them. So that's going to result in shifts in labor, shifts in skills, shifts in society. It'll have an impact on globalization because over the last 50 years, we've been shifting much more manual processes to other economies who haven't yet reached the levels of productivity and education as the U.S. Well, now some of these are going to be done by machines. So how does that impact the globalization, the macroeconomic factors across the world? So for me, artificial intelligence is going to be key. Now, quantum technology, for those who are not aware, we're talking about exponential leaps in computing power. Things are going to revolutionize the way that we compute and how long it takes to compute. That will truly make our communication secure. Yes, we have crypto technology and so forth today, but those are not, with certainty, they're not secure. With quantum, you will be able to get to that level of secure communication, but will also render many of our existing crypto technologies useless because quantum is gonna be so powerful today that it can break codes and it can make many other things that seem today almost impenetrable penetrable. It'll have significant impacts on measurements, on sensors and scientific modeling. It'll also impact economic and financial innovation. So it's going to change. Is it like 2 years away? No, it's about 5 to 10 years away, based at least what the trends. But you have super labs and our national labs that are experimenting in the potentials of quantum technology, and I believe even the state of Illinois has made a big investment to ensure that they're securing investments in what's going to be the one of the key components of the future. And then the last piece is blockchain technology, which is, many of us may or may not know to what degree. Most people think about cryptocurrencies and so forth, but in reality, the underlying technology of blockchain, which is to store, validate, and transfer trust, which trust could be money, could be data, could be information, and so forth. It provides transparent transactions, peer-to-peer transactions. It removes intermediaries, which eliminates central choke points. It's smart contracts. It's resilience and security. And so I think these three aspects will continue to evolve and continue to provide, a disruption to not just technologies and businesses, but just society overall.
Yeah, those are the three big ones. And I think the one, I guess maybe that one scenario that's tying it together, right? So Bitcoin, I believe today just hit an all-time high.
Mm,
And you can the thing, in one example, you can start to scenario model, well, hey, if Bitcoin hits this and I use this, somebody uses this much leverage and they have in this much, and you can put all this input into AI and get it modeled very, very fast, right? And what was almost such a pain even thinking about calculating can now get done in like seconds. And you can say, oh yeah, well, and you change a couple variables. Well, instead of maybe 70% leverage, just use 60% leverage. And instead of Bitcoin doubling, make it triple, and you can get answers instantly. On the quantum side, which is cool, is like you think about all these advancements in medicine and other things that the human genome that took weeks, months, I think months to kind of run the compute and calculate, right? Well, now it's like minutes or seconds, and then you can start doing things like preventative medicine and putting things and looking at millions of people who've had similar type things, and what's the either prescriptive supplements or medicine or anything like that. And you can't. And I think the funny thing is, it's like with quantum, it's almost like analogy could be like the cell phone or smartphone, 20 years ago. You kind of had it. We had no kind of idea that you'd have Uber or, Uber Eats or, just the way you're able to do so we can't even comprehend all the different ways that you're going to be able to use quantum, but we do know that this compute is going to be able to crunch so much data, so much, it's so fast, and it will be like all of those, they will be transformational.
I would agree. One of the key aspects that I've seen around quantum is the computing power it takes today for call it whatever scenario you're trying to do. 100 years with quantum, you'll be able to do it in less than 5 minutes. So think about the amount of computing power to do something 100 years, and you're going to do it in 5 minutes. And the advances that they're doing in that technology, which around the cooling of the computer, is what is finally allowing some of this technology to continue to evolve. And over at some point in about 5 to 10 years, then it'll become available much more for everyday use by companies and so forth. Before then, it becomes everyday use for just consumers and individuals. And it's, in my perspective, it's going to be one of the ways that it makes blockchain and even artificial intelligence even much more common than it is today.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So okay, so now and we touched on Bitcoin, by the way. So investments, right? So now there's these great, you called it the big three, and then there's others, but the big three. So you've got an interesting perspective because you're an investor as an individual. We've done some investments together, but then you've also seen, you also invested investors, as in the state of Illinois, some of the top funders of some of the top companies in the world right now. And then also it's your day to day. So, you got an individual perspective, also you have a corporate perspective. What would you like? How should the listeners out there think about investments, I guess, from an individual perspective, and maybe even call it broader asset class perspective that you see on a corporate side?
Yeah, most definitely. So one of the most important things that I always tell folks because when you're an investor, you obviously you either it comes from an education or from practice and experience, a certain level of interest, it excites you, etc. All of that are great aspects. I'm an investor, and it's something that I love. But I also realize that not everyone is like that. Not everyone loves to invest. Not everyone has this level of interest. And so then the question becomes, well, how do I invest in things that I think are going to be something of impact tomorrow? And for me, that's the most important thing, which is the trend analysis. Yes, it is important to understand the companies and the sector and the industry, and whether it's expensive, not expensive, is there an opportunity for arbitrage or not. Important. But for me, what's even more important is for one to understand and leverage their perspective of the world, either their profession or their experience or what they see around on a day-to-day basis, to identify things that they feel are changing. And for me, that's one of the most important things, is to understand trends. And so when we're thinking about investments, and you're like, well, maybe I don't consider myself an investor, and I shouldn't, I don't know how to even invest. Well, the first thing I would say is invest in trends, to understand how the world is changing. Don't do a trend that's already been established and it's all over the world, but it's something that you're seeing maybe in your teenagers, maybe at the office, you're seeing something beginning to shift. Maybe you're seeing it at a conference. Maybe you're seeing it in your industry before it reaches a little bit more broad based. And so then from there, then the question is, all right, if I identify a trend or a value proposition that I think is very unique and useful, then the question becomes is, all right, how do I expose myself to that? So you can do it through startups, assuming it's one that is much more based on innovation. You can do it through investing in established companies who have exposure to some of these technologies, or you can even invest in parallel industries that support that form of innovation or that trend. The question is always going to be the risk return trade-off. The more riskier, the higher the potential of the return. And so if we're talking about something very new, very that is going to position themselves at the onset, well, then you're investing in startups. You have groups like Angeles Investors that help investors come together and do it within a framework that optimizes your potential in those startups. You could do it and invest in established companies who have exposure to these technologies, like NVIDIA when it comes to artificial intelligence, or Microsoft when it comes to quantum. Or you can do parallel industries that don't have the same level of exposure, but they also don't have the same level of risk, right? You're talking about Oracle, who provides the servers that are so pertinent to, to artificial intelligence, which NVIDIA chips then power. So those are kind of things. Or even you're like, well, I even want to take less risk. You can invest in data centers, where you're investing in the real estate that houses the data centers that then are used for artificial intelligence and computing power, etc. So different measures of risk versus different measures of potential. Now, the key question here is that there's no cookie cutter approach to investing in opportunities. You have to evaluate each opportunity based on its merits. So following an approach that is tailored to the individual opportunity is always critical. But these are things like, if you're looking at something, whether it's startups, established companies, or parallel industries, but you think that there's an opportunity, we're talking about, what is the value proposition? What makes this so unique and so valuable versus competitors, versus other things that are happening in the industry? You have to think about customer and product traction of this potential investment opportunity. You have to look at the management and the team dynamics. You have to look at what makes this company defendable when it comes to this technology or this trend or this opportunity. Like, what's it's called an economic moat, but how do you ensure that someone wants to, I like what David and Rodrigo are doing. Can I copy them? And what is it that I can do to reduce that level of competition? Some part of it is a value proposition, but part of it could be your pricing, it could be your team, it could be things that make you different, and you create an economic moat. Then you have to understand the market. You have to understand the exit, assuming it's a startup. If it's not a startup and it's in the stock exchange, well, then it's much easier when it comes to your exit strategy. You have to understand the financials of the company or the stock, if you're looking at a particular stock of a public company. And then if it's a private company, you also got to understand the deal structure. It's very important to understand all what we all sometimes will just say, oh, and the legal mumbo jumbo. Well, that legal mumbo jumbo on the private market side is critical, because it contains some of the most esoteric terms, but that more than likely you will never have to exercise. But it's those that protect the investor over the long term. So at the end of the day, the way that I would always summarize to people is: invest in what you know, trust your intuition, and defend your thesis with friends and family to see if it makes sense as to why you should invest in an opportunity, regardless of where it stands in the risk spectrum overall.
In terms of that's very insightful. In terms of the call it the asset breakdown, maybe to the extent you're comfortable, like your personal, what's your, real estate, stocks, bonds,
Of course, you know,
venture, what's kind of your percent rough, maybe what's your current percent allocation? Maybe where would you like it to be, to the extent you feel comfortable sharing?
yeah, no problem. So what I would always, to take it from the top, is every individual, whether you're an institutional investor and you're representing billions of dollars, or you're an individual investor representing either tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars, is that you have to understand what are your investment objectives. What is it that you're trying to do with that pot? Is maybe, and you can have multiple pots. Maybe there's I want to have a pot to save for a down payment for a home. Maybe another pot for here's for, my college kids education. Maybe you have another pot for my retirement. Then you have another pot like general investment. So you have to understand what are your investment objectives, because that's going to then dictate your risk return profile, your level of willingness to take on any number of different investments, which then all of that creates an investment framework for the individual or for the institution. From there, then you talk about how you're able to allocate risk based on your risk return profile and each of these objectives. You do scenario, at least, once you start then getting into much more advanced stages, you do scenario planning to understand how your investments could perform under different macroeconomic scenarios. You can control the companies and the selections, but what you can't always necessarily control are the industry and or the macro that's happening either in the country or across the globe. Things like pandemics, etc. You should always be aware, great recessions, high interest rates, low interest rates. And then one of the things I always love to do is I don't just rely on my own particular expertise, and I don't do it just when I'm talking about a particular investment. I like to connect with people from all walks of life: doctors, engineers, architects, people in technology, people in literature, philosophy, English, biology, chemistry. Why? Because I get different perspectives about how they view the world, and so that level of insight, so maybe I don't glean from it at that moment in time, but 3 months down the road, a year down the road, it shapes my worldview. So as I'm making investments, I always stay, and not only is it one based on my own experience, but it's also one that is informed by conversations with multiple people, and then always obviously staying agile overall across the board. And so all that then to my current allocation, I would say it's about a third into real estate, a third into private companies. Most within that private company component, I would want to say 75% in venture, and about 25% in established companies with cash flows, much more akin to a much more of a private equity-esque, but I don't have control over those. But people who I know and trust do have control. And then the other third is in stocks and bonds. I'm probably a bit more heavy in what one would call illiquid investments, which are the real estate, because it's privately held real estate and private companies. But that's because I'm still young. At least I feel young, and I feel like I still have a significant amount of time into the future, that if some of these investments were not to pan out for one reason or another, even though I would say that my portfolio has performed spectacularly well over the last 20 years. But I also know that as I get older, and as I maybe start thinking about retirement in 20 years or so, then at that, I would presume that my allocation would shift, because my investment objectives will begin to shift. Right now, my investment objective is pretty much wealth accumulation, and so I'm willing to take on a bit more risk and invest in private companies and in real estate, uh, but also knowing that I like to have diversification, which is also why I have stocks and bonds and other than cash and short-term investments. So that's the way that I'm currently allocated, to give you a little bit of flavor, yeah, into the way that I would approach an investment framework, and then how that then colors my own investment framework personally.
Yeah, no, very Kyle. There's so many great nuggets in there. Like, just what are your objectives, your risk tolerance, diversification across asset classes. How do you think? And then, as where you're at in your life, and family, and also generational planning, right? I mean, there's all whole kind of insights there that you provided, Rodrigo. So the other part of exponential growth is around leadership. So you've led in the military, you've led in corporate, you've led in the CFO function, state government, boards, right? We're in these times of a lot of different exponential change. You mentioned kind of what you call the big three, and there's others out there. What do you think about leadership, or maybe three core principles ish on leadership? And do they change in all these times, or are they amplified, or do you think about them differently, or just your general thoughts on how do our listeners best lead in this environment that we're living in with all the exponential growth?
Yeah, most definitely. And like I have a lot of different thoughts of, things that we should always keep in mind. So I'll just mention a couple because obviously I don't want to. I love leadership, and which I view it very differently than management and supervision. Leadership is much more about inspiring and having an organization or a team do things that move towards a vision. And so we have to understand ourselves, those who have been asked to lead. We have to know our strengths and our limitations, and we have to know the same of our team and how we're able to put together a diverse team of skills and experiences and perspectives. We have to understand our ability to be technically but also tactically proficient. So it's not just about the hard and technical skills, but it's also as much about the soft skills. We have to understand that we cannot ask people to do things that we're not willing to do ourselves. We have to set the example. We have to understand that we move forward as a team. It's never about the individual. We have to understand that, life is a toll road, not a freeway. We have to, continue to provide and for ourselves and continuously learn. And I'm a big proponent of continuous learning because the world evolves and you have to evolve as well. And so these are kind of the things that I'm always trying to keep at the top of my mind as I'm leading into a world that is constantly changing, constantly evolving. And it's, the world is always in a constant state of revolution, one that is
Yeah.
constantly changing and constantly evolving.
I'm saying, I even say now it's faster, right? I mean, this is kind of why, this is one of the reasons why doing this exponential growth podcast, it's things are just happening so fast. It's hard to keep up, right? So the thought is, hey, get smart people like yourself on here and share how they're seeing these things and what are the key trends and some examples and then how do you lead? How do you take action? So those are just very insightful, Rodrigo.
Yeah, and
Uh,
and look, the last piece I would say is, the world is changing a lot. It's changing in and in our demographics. Obviously, the Latino community continues to grow. The impact in its youth, its dynamism, cultural, economic components. The world is becoming ever more connected with social media and communication. Speed, you'll be able to travel between countries even faster into the future. The quality of life will change and will continue to change. If you think our quality of life today to 50 years ago, to 100 years ago, and then all under this notion of American exceptionalism, and I know that the U.S. is not perfect, and neither is any country, and neither is any person, and so one of the things that makes us different is our freedom of our life, our liberty, and our pursuit of happiness, our form of democracy, our economic and social mobility, and our innovation and entrepreneurship, and all these things will also continue to change into the future. I don't mean in a negative way, but it's the bedrock. And if you look at our country when it was founded in 1776 to today, it's exceptionalism has shifted and evolved to catch up with the times. And so when you're thinking about the leadership, it's leadership in growth, and it's leadership in interconnectedness, it's leadership in as the world evolves and changes, all within this notion of American exceptionalism or even global exceptionalism, whether you're in Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, and so and in your stories like think about it, kind of goes full circle, right? You have somebody who comes up south side of Chicago, works hard, family works hard, and then works themselves all the way up, right, to all the different roles and things that we talk about. And the other thing is that you're just getting warmed up, right? Because there's a lot of other great things ahead, definitely, Rodrigo. So, Rodrigo, how do people stay connected with you on social and anything? Keep up with all the great stuff. Where do they find you on social?
Yeah, the most simplest, and maybe depending on your age, it could be the most boring is on LinkedIn. That's the easiest and most concise way of staying in contact with me, since it is a business tool that allows you to connect with people all across the world on a number of different pieces. I unfortunately do not have neither Twitter/X what is it?
Snapchat or no, Instagram.
Instagram, none of those. It's LinkedIn. And so if you're ever want to connect, exchange messages, or just drop me a line for one reason or another, that's going to be the best way.
Excellent. Well, hey, Rodrigo, I know you got a lot of stuff going on, and want to thank you for making it a priority, coming on, sharing all, not only your story, the insights, the leadership, the trends, etc. So thanks again, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share my story of optimism and grit with your listeners and your viewers. And I look forward to continuing this conversation, David, in a number of other ways. And for everyone tuning in, I hope you were able to pick up some morsels of wisdom. And with that, thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you.